Can you hear me? It is a very, it's a very sad. I should not say this again and again, but it's a very sad thing about to be here and to talk instead of like Manjira was telling. No, we should have been talking with Professor Saibaba. We should be sitting in his house and spending time with him, talk about writing and everything. So it is extremely depressing that we are talking in his memorial lecture. I mean, this tragedy should not happen. And for me and Professor Sai, I think it is. When you're young, you always think everybody here also called me young. So please, I turned 40 last year, and I was like, yeah, okay, now finally I'm going to become a responsible adult. And on my birthday, I passed away. So I realized that there is something in life, there is something in that for me. That it is a moment for me to also look back. What is this life? What is it to grow up? What is it to, grow older? And I'm a very emotional person, and I cannot look at the two things together, that of all the days, supposed to be that one day you are happy, one day whatever, and it's like this very stark thing happened, and I've never gotten over it. Like this year also, I didn't go anywhere, I didn't celebrate. Life, this is what life is like. God takes away people who are dear to you, people who you look up to, and all of that. And and the, and the reason I want to come here and I also talk about this, yeah, I said God, but that's okay. I secretly or publicly believe. But to go back to this topic on to speak about writing, literature, dissent, and literature, and also what writers do in this democratic transformation, I really want to use Professor Sai as a template. Is it okay? Yeah, I want to use him as a template for all of us who are writers, all of us who are dealing with literature, all of us who have to be out there and express our ideas. And for me the question was, there is a lot of things that everybody has told about, Sai's history, what he has spoken about. And here I wanted to really use this opportunity of his memorial lecture to talk about what are we doing as writers, and also are we actually doing enough. And this is a question that I was joking when Comrade Ravi actually asked me, what do you want to talk about, and the topic again was dissent and literature, freedom of expression in literature. I have come to Hyderabad 4 times and did the same lecture, once in month and once last year for Gaddar's anniversary. So I'm like, no, I cannot always talk about the same thing, because from the outside it looks like it's the same topic, same question paper, same answer paper. So I decide that I want to talk about what else that we can talk about. How else do you, because it's not a small question. It doesn't matter that you just talk once and you repeat the same thing, because I am continuously thinking about this question. So, and where I want to come in and what I'll take up later in this talk is that, are we as writers, we are questioning fascism today, because that is the big problem of democracy. But this whole problem with democracy, this entire global slide into authoritarianism, it's not a political accident, but it is a unchecked, inevitable final form of neoliberal capitalism. And I think that with writers, we are not doing enough, or we are not even thinking it is a problem. And this is where my entire thesis is going to come from, or what I'm going to talk today. So I want to dedicate my lecture, of course, to Professor J.N. Saibaba, whose life and imprisonment offer us the starkest proof of the state's lethal equivalence between the pen and the gun. The fact that people could openly say that it's the mind which is the most dangerous thing. The people could realize that this is what happened with Antonio Gramsci. The fact that that some minds of this country had to be locked up, had to be going through solitary confinement, had to face whether it was Professor Sai under UAPA, or it is the Bhima Koregaon intellectuals. I wanted to dedicate this to him and to his memory, and to understand that his life of resistance has to be something for all of us to look forward and to learn lessons from, and to take it forward. So now to come for what is the role of the writer in democratic transformation, the broader topic. I want to understand, like, how do we understand fascism, this genesis of fascism, this problem of, and I think that we have to address this neoliberal contradiction that exists at the heart of fascism, because there is a famous quote that's often credited to Lenin. It's, of course, as usual with a lot of Lenin quotes, it's not necessarily Lenin who said that, but often fascism is capitalism's last resort. And the current wave of authoritarianism that we are seeing everywhere in the world, it is in many ways the ugly child of capitalist decay. This is what Ernst Lund says about it. So it is this kind of fascism is the last resort of the capitalist class everywhere, that they have to hijack democracy, they have to behave in this manner. So when fascism becomes the political form of capitalist rule, we are actually watching in some ways the death agony of capitalism, the failure of capitalism. And when I say capitalism, it's easily understood, but also I think that sometimes we are now living in a very technocratic era, so you also have to give numbers. And so the thing is that what exactly are the numbers? I'm not going to go into detail, but part of what's happening under monopoly capitalism is that there is unprecedented extraction. So you have 1% of the population of the world who are capturing 63 of all newly generated wealth. And so for instance in India again, like you have just two big business houses, Adanis and Ambanis, who control 40% of all critical infrastructure. So there is a grotesque wealth concentration everywhere. And again, this is happening on one hand, and on the other hand, like as much as everybody is going and saying, okay, the prime minister is doing direct benefit transfers, DBT, and there's this and that, but you also have to understand that Indian poverty is state managed, stage managed, because the system is so broken that it requires this massive state intervention just to keep society from imploding. So you have like 60% of India's population requiring state support for basic survival. You have like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme that's supporting about 260 million workers. So what actually is happening? On the one hand, the rich get so rich, on the other hand, the poor people have to be kept with all of this massive influx of money from actually slipping into worse poverty or slipping into revolution. And I think this crisis of democracy, how many of us as writers are dealing with this? How many of us are dealing with this specific economic problem instead of actually giving it to allowing, okay, it's an economist problem, okay, it's a sociological problem, as opposed to it is also a writer's issue, because you can clearly see that it's happening elsewhere in the world. And we know when we are writers that if every story has a beginning and a middle and an end, we know that this is the beginning and this we are living through the middle, and where is this end point going to be? Because when you're a writer, you have to understand that kind of narrative. The narrative is not going to change unless you and with people work towards changing it. And part of this is also the crisis of democracy itself, is that democracy under capitalism has become a very shallow, corrupted form of democracy, and it's nothing to do with what you call a genuine democracy that comes and gets carried out from the grassroots. And once again, I also want to talk about this in the framework of what recently happened in Nepal, what happened in Bangladesh, what happened in Sri Lanka, and what happened in Indonesia. So around these parts of the world, we saw something that was a kind of Arab Spring reboot. We saw young people take to the streets. We saw young people topple power. We saw young people. But then this again brings us to the question of, okay, if this is happening, who has actually failed? Because a lot of these young people were not necessarily, or even they would have identified as left, but they were not part of a broad-based left movement. They did not necessarily have a revolutionary vision of what you do afterwards. And this again, I think, is a moment for us to look back and say, as one of the world's regions with the youngest demographic, this is also an urgent question for us to deal with as writers, as people who are public intellectuals, that what is happening to our young people? Are young people only into influencers? Are young people only into aesthetics? Are young people, and that's the problem with fascism as well, isn't it, that fascism causes for an aesthetization of politics, and can only give you empty aesthetics. So and so here again, I also want us to look at it not as writers living in India, because a lot of the things about Professor Sai, for instance, his work has resonances globally. We have professors from outside. The country actually talking about what his work means to them or what his understanding of literature meant to them. And I think one of those things is we also cannot understand or look at India in isolation. We cannot think that okay, what is happening is a very specific problem. It is an RSS problem. It is an, a specific, I think, or any group's problem. I think the problem is that there is a global imperialist complicity, and the thing is that there is, and especially in the light of what happened in Gaza, what happened in Palestine, that we all saw the kind of live stream genocide that went on for 2 years uninterrupted. We understood that this global imperialist framework, it operates in order to erode any kind of democracy, erode any kind of democratic rights, and that all of these growing anti-imperialist tensions are also meant with very anti-democratic measures, like the clampdown on protest, the clampdown on speech. And also we have, for once in a while, for what was necessarily relegated to far left circles in terms of understanding imperialism. Okay, imperialism, that's a very Maoist terminology. Anti-imperialism is a Maoist terminology. There was this idea that somehow it was a Maoist conception that has been broken, or the fact that it was a national liberation struggle. Okay, the LTT is worried about this, the Maoists are worried about it. I think that has been shattered after Gaza. That has absolutely been shattered, and you understand that imperialism is also a monster that you have to fight, because all of Western imperialism's pretension that they were doing things because they were opposed to China, they were opposed to Russia, they were opposed to Iran, it fell because it showed you they set for a genocide in Gaza. So, and once again with Gaza, we have to go back and think what was India's role in it, what's connection with India and Israel, and why is the West, which talks about other things, continuing to only look at India as a back office or as a market? Is there anything else that it's worried about? Is that why they turn a complete blind eye? If they're already turning a blind eye to Gaza, they're naturally going to turn a blind eye to whatever human rights abuses that happen in India. And then again, when you look at what is happening around the world, you're also realizing, especially with the rise of Trump and the rise of the far right across Europe, you also realize that all of these fascist movements, whether in India, Europe, or America, are also tied with this core ideology where Islamophobia is a very unifying force. And there can be no other way of putting it. And there's also, this again comes with it, its own brand of anti-migrant rhetoric. There's an attack on women's rights, on women's reproductive rights, and also the weaponization of nationalism. So, and the material base of what is happening here again is that even if capitalism is the foundational enabler, there's a lot of economic anxiety that is allowed to channel this kind of hate, and which makes people push for greater austerity, greater measures. And at the end of all of this whole okay, things are happening in the US, things are happening in America, they're slapping tariffs and all of this, but at the heart of it, it again comes back to how does it concern us as Indians? If they are bombing Gaza, how does it concern us? And I think it actually concerns us because this issue of land grab is not just happening there. This issue of extractive capitalism is already coming to us. It's already there in Bastar. It's already there in a lot of places where they want to do the mining. But also this capitalist acquisition of agricultural land, how much are we worried about it? The idea of privatization and commodification of water, the fact that there's so much mining happening, especially only in the global south, and the kind of repression that's faced when you oppose it. And we see this happen, unfold in Bastar. We find in Bastar, for instance, this date for Operation Kagar, and saying that by March 2026 that all of quote unquote Naxalism will be eliminated. And we have to understand that all of this is tied up in so many ways, and where are the writers? So there's so many protests, there's so many problems, there's so much going on, and then the big question is, but where are the writers? And for me this is a big question, because this should be a question that we are speaking at literature festivals. We've never before lived in India, and we've never had so many literature festivals before. So every city has a festival. Some cities have 4 or 5 festivals, and like October, November, the weather starts getting better, and then you have like every single festival starts happening. But these are not things that get articulated there. These questions, these very urgent, pressing questions of our time, don't get tied up to writing. They don't get tied up in literary discourse, and therefore the literary discourse, this kind of discourse, is relegated to what is again left or what is seen as far left. And this is the big dissonance, that how do you operate as a writer, and how do you make sure that this is something that every other writer is talking about? Because it's not like, okay, I have like personally leased out and said, okay, Kandaswamy is going to talk about all these issues, others can talk about nicer issues, because no, it's not like that. So, and I think that's the big, tragedy in front of us. And here I actually want to talk about, just as I pointed out, this glaring paradox that never have we had more festivals and never have we had less freedom or less space or to articulate, Bastar, the clampdown on rights, the whatever oppression is happening, the people being sent to jail for blog post, for writing on X, all of these things. And I think that there is something that we'll really have to call out or sit with ourselves and understand that, if a writer is a watchman, sorry to use a very everyday word, but if you are an alert person, if you're somebody who is like, okay, something's happening, I have to be alert, just that state of alertness. The thing is that we have failed as an intellectual class. It's one thing, it's one thing after the act to go and analyze it. I mean, that we are going to produce some of the greatest intellectuals in the world 20 years later who'll tell us what went wrong. But what are we doing in the here and now? And I think this is again where Sai's life is like, he was not just, a professor, he was not just a writer, he was also somebody who was trying his best to work with civil society, with people's groups, with people's movements. And he is the extreme example that can show what actually is wrong with all of us. And here I think that especially somebody who also comes from the progressive South, which I think is a very loaded word, the idea of the progressive South, because I think what has happened in the South, and especially someone coming from Tamil Nadu, which is everybody's favorite model state, everybody's best example of an advertising state, everybody's best advertisement model, is that you have an absolute illusion of freedom, right? You're like, oh, writers are so free, writers are this, writers are that. And I think that there's something about this liberal secular trap, that artistic establishment falls into this absolute trap. And so you can selectively outrage. People are fine if you outrage about a few things. You can, but there are few things that you just cannot talk about. And I think this illusion of freedom to express, this idea that, oh no, we are a social justice model, and on the one hand you sell this brand of social justice, but on the other hand, sanitary workers who are fighting on the streets, their jobs were absolutely privatized. And this is very interesting. For instance, you go back to 1905 and you read the Madras census, and the Madras census tells you that the British decide that because the city has to be safe from diseases, they decide to make all the conservancy staff permanent workers of the government. And so this happens during the British period. And then who is it who comes and privatizes 10,000 workers of the Chennai Corporation? It is our dear Chief Minister Stalin. And this he does it when he's mayor. And now again the privatization is happening, and conservancy workers who, sanitation workers who are protesting are, arrested in the midnight. They're being brutally beaten up by the police. And then you manage the media so well, and everyone has understood from Modi how to manage media, and you manage the media so well, and the story never comes out. You never realize that, there is a huge problem, that workers cannot protest. And how do they manage the media? And this is again where writers fail. They manage the media by saying, the conservancy workers took out a protest, took out a march to thank the CM for agreeing to give them food 3 times a day. But that was not even a demand of the protest. That was not what the protest was all about. But this absolute PR spin, absolute media spin, and then you realize this is happening in front of your eyes. And the problem again is, I think in India we have this, and we have to call this out, is that we are fine with everything up to the point of secularism. That we think that as long as capitalism wants to do whatever it wants, but it's capitalism with the secular phase, we are going to be fine. But there is a problem there, because capitalism with the secular phase is still going to end up as extractive capitalism. It's going to end up as exploitative capitalism. It's going to end up as capitalism with nepotism, capitalism with dynasty plus plus. And then actually this capitalism is going to pave the way for a fast-tracked fascism. It's going to make the way for people to say, okay, there are no options. Everybody is a fraud. Therefore, we are going to the far right. And this is something we are not talking about. Across Europe, this happened. How did the far right come in Europe? It happened as a result of neoliberalism. It happened as a result of this kind of privatization. It happened as a result of this kind of kickbacks and, backdoor whatever backdoor things were going on. And I think this is something that we have to be alert, because we have to understand from history that what happens when capitalism runs rogue. What happens if capitalism wears a social justice face, or at least the veneer of social justice. And again, I feel I have to say this point when I'm in Hyderabad, because Revanth Reddy was there, and Revanth Reddy was there because Tamil Nadu was celebrating the fact that we are giving breakfast to school children. This sounds very interesting, but the fact is 1204 schools have been closed down in Tamil Nadu. The fact is that there are teachers, more than 12,000 teachers are contract workers who have been working for 10, 12 years, and their jobs have not been made permanent. And the fact is, again, we talk about Tamil all the time, but the number of children who study Tamil has fallen from 54 lakhs a year to 30 lakhs a year. So there is all of these things going on, but then of course we can import Revanth Reddy. And we can import, and Revanth Reddy can come and tell us it's the great social justice model. And I think this is really, I wanted to go into this very specific example just to point out the contradictions of capitalism, the contradictions of what we live through, the fact that something looks, comes with a better icing on the cake, and then we think, okay, this is not fascism. No, but it is going to lead to fascism. And I think this is the writer's job. And I also think that this blind spot is one of those things that I start increasingly thinking about, because we openly look away from neoliberal state governments who advocate 12-hour working days, as long as these governments are in and of themselves secular. Again, Tamil Nadu introduced a private universities bill. This means that every government aided college could transform itself into a private university, which means what happens to reservation, which means what happens to scholarship, which means what happens to the way these institutions are run. And the question again is that if it was, let's say, the right wing which was doing this, all of us will be on the street. All of us will be like, this is the end of education in India. But if somebody with, a social justice mask is doing that, we don't outrage. We think they are our friends. But the question again is, are they our friends, or are they sowing the seeds for tomorrow's fascist? And I think that because of our blind eye to the loot of people's money, to dynasty politics that's dressed up in the guise of social justice, we are gearing up to face the consequence someday. Because when democracy rots, and when the left is silent under the facade of a secular capitalist politics, we are actually rolling out the red carpet for the far right. And I think that a writer, others can be selective. People who want to become famous can be selective. People who want to get government jobs can be selective. People who want to, be on the state payroll or on a committee or be appointed, they can be selective. But I don't think a writer can be selective, because you must attack what leads to fascism. We cannot only attack that end point. We cannot only attack fascism. And I think this is where this is something that's absolutely lost, like everywhere. And I really wanted to articulate this. And so, coming back again to this issue of what happens when you're a writer. So what worse can happen? So already if you are writing, you're called an urban Naxal. You said that you are the pen is more dangerous than the gun. So we have already seen this lethal combination of the law and labeling. We have seen that this urban Naxal has been an informal way of clamping down on intellectuals and artists, calling them suspected terrorists, and it works in liaison with laws like UAPA. And what is happening to thought in this process? And I want to again reflect on this as a writer, because on the one hand they're doing this publicly, on the other hand we also learn that a lot of people's phones have Pegasus on them. We know that a lot of people are surveilled by the state. We know that our emails are tracked, our WhatsApp is tracked, our location is tracked. So you're also living under this this confluence of an oppressive state, big data, and surveillance. And then what do you do? And I think a lot of writers are actually taking the easy way out, and the easy way out is obviously to self-censor. The easy way out is not to speak. The easy way out is to say, okay, I was sitting with it, I'm going to sit with it, and I'll write about it in 20 years' time. But that's when you're not a writer, then you become a historian. The nature of your job changes. And I think that when there is authoritarianism, I think we'll have to meet it not by becoming silent and not by self-censorship, but actually by facing what actually comes, like facing, okay, is it imprisonment, is it trolling, is it being politically lynched, by all kinds of name calling. And then I think you'll have to really really take that, because for myself, like when I have been critical of the regime, whichever regime it is, there's always character assassination. And when you're a woman, it's indelibly, it becomes that. And the question then is that all this all this silence also costs a lot of people's lives. And um, and we see, I think, just like we were talking about Palestine, and we saw what is happening. A lot of the writers who were quiet, they now stand exposed in front of us. We know which of our friends stood for Palestine. We know from social media which of our friends were not. And I think in India, we again have to talk. We have to realize this. Who are the writers talking about Bastar? Who are the writers talking about, all the conflict zones in this country? Who are the writers who are anti-mining? And who are the writers who are very quiet about it? I'm not even saying, okay, boycott everything. I'm just saying, is there an awareness? Like, are you at least saying that you're uncomfortable with these things? And because I think the problem with the great silence is that, our silence also enables the more killings. If you're silent about Bastar, if you're silent about what is happening in the name of Operation Kagar, I think that you're also enabling the death of more people by that. I'm not making any direct equivalence, but I do believe that, we empower them with our silence. So and I want to, move towards a conclusion. So having said all of this, I think that the writers act is an act of necessary. Sorry. Yeah, I think the writing is an act of, when we have a state machinery that's so grotesque and absurd, and that it has, the neoliberal state doesn't want you to express, a criticism against itself, and they've already made us all abandon what we call a collective struggle. And they have done this in so many ways, and I'm not even sure I have the time to go into it. But for instance, one of the major ways is identity politics, by telling you stay in your lane, you don't talk about this. Only some people can talk about some struggles, which means that a collective can never be formed. And you find this in multiple ways, that, or when a writer says, oh, this is very interesting what's happening in Bastar, but I'm not going to talk about it because I am not a Adivasi, or I'm not from Chhattisgarh. Then again, it's a kind of sophisticated abandonment, where you say, oh, I don't want to talk about Gaza because I'm not in Gaza. Like, we cannot exist in these silos. And these kind of silos are basically a kind of cop out from actually taking action. And I think the lesson from me, from all of, is that every act of, writing or understanding is an act of resistance against the system, because this system doesn't want people to collectivize. This system does not want us to work together. This system does not want us to come under, any kind of left rubric. So this left battle for democracy needs to be organically integrated. It has to include, people who have the courage to stand up, but also the people who are being oppressed. And I think that for writers, the answer is, the writer cannot exist in alienation, and the writer cannot exist in a shameful silence. And that we must reject the comfort and the glamour of the art world, because it tempts us to talk about writing as an act of resistance in and of itself, instead of writing about the resistance. And I think there's so much resistance that's going on around the country. And I feel that, in especially, when I was like reading this book that has come out on Professor Sai, and the way he was organizing something for political prisoners. He was organizing something against, an anti-imperialist front, and he was organizing farmers movements and all of this. And I felt that we also have to, I mean, maybe not at the scale of Professor Sai, but we'll also have to focus ourselves on, attacking this rot of unchecked capital, this neoliberal exploitation that's eventually going to birth fascism. And we must also stop being selectively secular and selectively liberal, and that we'll have to forge a theoretical unity, because what is our craft for? Our craft has to bring together the intellect and the masses. Then we have to make sure that the raw energy on the streets gets revolutionary direction, because any theory without praxis is what Lenin called sterile abstraction. So I think that writers have to be there for this marriage. And we'll also have to break the silence that exists today, because we have to move beyond the topics that we are allowed to discuss by the festival circuit, and we have to use our platforms to expose militarization, land grabs, and the state the murders and sexual violence perpetrated by the state that the mainstream chooses to ignore. And most of all, I think we'll have to embrace the blowback, because when we speak truth to power, there's always, and especially when you're a woman, it's so gendered, there's so much abuse, there's so much trolls, there's so much doxing, there's so much violence that's directed against you. And I think we'll have to find the courage for that, because Manjira was saying, oh, my father does not like the word sacrifice. And that is, I think, a lesson for us, that we should not think we are doing a sacrifice. We should just think, I'm doing my job. And I think that's the note on which I want to end. And I thank Professor Haragopal of the Memorial Committee. I thank Comrade Ravi Chandra. I thank Manjira and all the others for giving me this opportunity.